Well, we're back out on the water chasing some crappies again today and kind of exploring some new waters. I wanted to kind of experiment with a few different things, trying to find some different fish in some different areas, maybe potentially targeting some bigger fish even. Not going to show a lot of that footage here, but did kind of trigger some ideas in my head to just kind of talk through my presentation, because I ripped through a bunch of different presentations while chasing these fish and want to talk through the situations where I use each presentation. And we're going to kind of start out from right after ice out and move as it gets to be the spawn. So we're going to kind of run through my progression. Then I'm going to talk through some of the different situations where I will use each one of these. And we're going to start with ice out. When I'm getting out on the water just after ice out, some of these fish, if you watch my last video, are still out in the basin or they're moving a little bit closer to those shorelines, but they're typically in some decent sized groups, but they're also moving fairly fast and sometimes in that like 15 foot of water range. So when I'm doing that, I want something that's going to get down a little bit quicker and that I can move around, kind of do a run and gun style of fishing. And so what I'm doing is I'm using some sort of 1/8 ounce tungsten jig. This one is the Crappie King jig, and you can see I finally got my pan candy plastics in. I've been waiting to get some of these in because I really like that TPE plastic. So right now I have that grub tied on. I like that because that has that really good tail action, as you can see, even just moving in the wind. But also it's just a little bit bigger profile. And a lot of times I'm out, I'm either trying to target some of these more singles or small groups over the basin. That's where you'll find some of the bigger fish, or I'll just cast it and work it over top of some of these bigger groups, because that can also pull some of the bigger fish out, some of the more aggressive fish out. So that is kind of one of my first go-tos that I'll use, something a little bulkier that I can target some of these bigger fish. I will also still use 1/8 ounce, but you watch my last video, my couple last videos that I've shot in the springtime. This Crappie King fly, I think is what it's called, another one by Northland, is so awesome. Don't have to deal with any plastic, don't have to deal with any bait. You can catch 100 fish on it and you're not gonna have to worry about it. For some reason, there's something about a lot of different sizes of fish like that. So that's kind of a good just go-to for all around, all different sizes of fish. You can catch some smaller ones, some more finicky ones. But one thing I will say, going back to being able to catch a bunch of fish, I do, just like my plastics in the summertime, I do super glue that onto the head. And I don't know how many fish I caught today, and you can see it's still in amazing shape. So that is a lot of what I'll use early ice. I won't kind of sway from that too much, just because it's so effective to be able to go and target some of these moving fish. And rod, I'm using probably a little bit longer rod, like a 7-footer. And the nice thing is with this 1/8 ounce jig and that 7-foot rod, you can really cast these things quite far if these schools are just moving too fast and you need to just rip it out there at 60, 70 feet. That's something you can definitely do. I have that on the Carbon X2 1000. I use that a ton for panfish, for crappie specifically, especially when I'm targeting bigger fish, using a little bit bigger baits like this. That 1000 size paired with that 7-foot seem to be that kind of right balance. And again, that Carbon X2 is phenomenal. I'll use some sort of 4-pound braid. Try to get some sort of high vis line is my preferred one. Just again, if you can see these fish up bite, any advantage that you can have is going to be helpful. And I'll run that on an FG knot to about 4-pound fluorocarbon leader. I will even go down to like 2-pound, or sometimes if I'm really desperate, go down to 1 pound, although you have to be very careful not to have that one snap, because that 1-pound test can be dangerous. So if I really need to, I will downsize that, but 4-pound test is going to get it done for me 99% of the time. So that's going to be kind of my right after ice out run and gun style, where I can kind of whip around some heavy baits. When we're getting into a little bit more of this time of year, we're kind of like intermediate right now. These fish are moving from those basins and they're either working along those break lines where there's cattails, reeds, anywhere that there's some good shallow spawning grounds with some mud. They're going to be moving closer to those. Or if you watch my last video, I really started to find some of these fish on this intermediate flat where it's like, 15. Today I saw a lot of fish on 10 to 15 feet on these kind of intermediate flats, again, adjacent to some of those spawning grounds. So when we're in kind of that range, what I saw today was a lot of fish, but they were not very far underneath the water. They were maybe 5 feet down. So I will do a very similar program, but I'll move to like a 16th ounce tungsten jig. This one might be the broom bug or something like that, but I will use that Crappie King jig as well. So moving down to a 16th ounce, if you really want to even downsize even more and pull out some ice fishing jigs, something like that can be very effective as well. Casting on these, if you get some wind like I had today though, this did get a little bit tricky. Even that wind pushing it would push the line as I was casting to them. So that got a little bit challenging, but I will still use that same bigger profile, you know, to try pull out some of those bigger fish. I just noticed that using that heavier bait got down way too quickly. The other thing I will do, if I need to downsize a little bit, I will downsize to this one. This is that smaller leech pan candy plastic. Again, can catch 100 fish on it. It's that TPE plastic that is so stretchy like that. Being able to go to some sort of smaller presentation like that was also helpful. When I had a little bit smaller plastic on there, it did get down a little bit quicker though, so just keep that in mind as well. Or that bigger bait, that's when it's a little bit buoyant like that, helped it to stay up a little bit. Another one that I will use that I did like today, I was trying to find something that I could get a little bit heavier, that 16th ounce jig. I was not able to cast very good into the wind, and so I actually switched it up to a slip bobber for a little while today. Because I wanted to be able to get something that could get a little more weight, and that bobber just helped me get a little bit better cast, a little bit farther cast. Could still use that 16th ounce jig. I was using that Crappie King fly a lot for this one. So being able to switch to that slip bobber helped it kind of just stay around those fish a little longer. I did tip this with a crappie minnow a lot as well. And so that was a pretty effective setup for me. However, when those fish were very close to the surface, when they weren't very far underneath, I did notice that even in the wind a little bit, even with some of the waves, it would spook the fish with the bobber. So if you are going to use that to cast a little farther, or another time is when I have kids out, or maybe people that don't fish a ton, I really like using some sort of bobber just so they can use it as a strike indicator. I guess I sound like a fly fisherman when I'm saying that, but just so they can see when they're getting bit, instead of trying to feel that. And you know, that just gets a little bit easier for maybe a little bit less experienced anglers as well. Or sometimes even myself, I just love seeing that bobber go down. So that is something I did use today with even that intermediate bite where they're moving around a little bit, being able to kind of utilize it as a way to, again, slow that presentation down. And when I am using a slip bobber, you know, I'll start down here, Crappie King fly, told you about that. And then I will use, again, probably a 2 to 4 pound fluorocarbon leader. I typically use 4 pound fluorocarbon. And I will use a swivel there just to, you know, stop that slip bobber. And these are the light bite bobbers. I love these things with the weight on them like that. The pencil bobbers work very good as well. You have your little bead, and again, 4 pound braid. And sometimes with a slip bobber, I do like to use a 7-foot rod as well, just because I want a little more length to cast, and I want to be able to get some of that slack out of the line. A little bit longer rod is very helpful for that. So very similar setup, Piscifun Carbon X2 1000. That's a lot what I'm going to use. Honestly, actually I have on this one, I have the Piscifun, it's the newer one, Carbon XT. Not going to say a lot about that yet because I just haven't got a chance to use it, and I want to be able to give you an honest opinion. But it seems like a good reel so far. That is another intermediate presentation. We're on these flats and just roaming and going into, like, now the spawn is very close to happening. These fish are shallow. Kind of what I saw today is anytime there's a lot of cattails or reeds and there's a relatively steep break down to like 10 to 15 feet of water, there are fish roaming all of that. So those are the fish that I anticipate are going to be going up into the shallows to spawn very close to that area. You know, right now we're at water temps 48 degrees. My last video I posted, we were like 39 to 40. Those fish were still closer to the basin, out a little bit deeper. Now with that even 5 to 10 degrees that we are further, those fish are just moving closer and closer to spawn grounds. So when I get to spawn grounds, that's when I use a classic bobber, very similar to the setup that I just talked about. However, sometimes I will just use like a spring bobber as well. Northland has some really nice spring bobbers that are very similar to a lot of these. You can use some that just have one clip where they clip on. You know, sometimes you get a little more drag when you're reeling fish in, or even when you're reeling your jig in if you want to keep it moving. Or they have some where, you know, you can clip on both sides and it'll be a little bit more inline. So if you're fishing like really shallow, when they get way up into the reeds and they're in like 1 foot, 2 feet of water, sometimes those clip-on ones are even better, because you can see here, even if I could shorten my fluorocarbon leader up, but you can see there's still, you know, a couple feet there, and being able to have it on my swivel like that, I'm just going to run out of space. So having those clip-on ones can be very nice as well if you need to get really shallow. And so a lot of times is when that water is getting into that 50 plus range for sure, sometimes more like 55 plus, 60, kind of into that range. That's when these fish are moving shallow. The other thing I will do is I will go down to, even go into some of my ice fishing jigs, and go down to, you know, 30-second or some of these really small jigs, and I will just, if it's on a calm day, I can just really cast those up in there and just slow pull them back. Sometimes that little bit of movement is helpful as well, but you can do the same thing with a bobber. Again, you're just at more risk for spooking these fish. Anytime you're using a bobber and it's kind of slapping the ground or slapping the water, you're at risk for spooking some of those fish. So that's just a way to get around that, is just using a very small jig. You can even use a 1/16 ounce, but sometimes that will just drop in too quickly as well. So I will also, even before I had live scope, this is what I did a lot, is I'll use either an 1/8 or a 1/16 ounce jig, and I will just kind of cast it back and I'll just troll along some of these shorelines. One of the things I noticed, there was a few areas where I had big stretches of cattails and reeds, and there was groups of fish along all of those. So you could have a couple people that will just slow troll. You can cast it out, slow troll, just let it follow behind, let out a little more line if you're not getting bites, or reel in a little bit, just change your depths up a little bit. That's another thing that you can do either during that spawn time, just get really tight to those reeds and do that, let that bait be way behind, or in this intermediate time as well. I have a tougher time with that right after ice out, just because it's a much more expansive area, whereas it gets closer to spawn, you can really hone in on some of those reeds or some of those areas that are adjacent to those spawning grounds. Whew. Well, that was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. Hopefully my Minnesotan didn't come out in me too much where I was talking too fast. But now what I'm actually gonna do, I'm actually gonna go and fish a few more of these fish, kind of show you a few of these presentations and how I will work them. Hopefully catch a few fish to end this video. Good group right here close to us. Just gonna pop it right above them. And there he bit. It was like right here. This one I did use the 1/8. I probably could have used the smaller one on that. Whoop, that one was so close to the surface, probably could have used 1/16 ounce, but I already had the 1/8 in hand. There's a high group, so since they're so high, that 1/8 would probably drop down too fast. So I'm gonna try get this around them. This 1/16 ounce, there, I got it on the other side. You can see them all coming up after it already. Come on, one of you guys commit to it. Ooh, I got below them. That's partially why. Come on, there he bit. Not a big one though, very little. Not, whoop, and there he popped off. We're gonna go back because there looked like some okay fish in that group. That one was just not one of them. Usually when you get the little bit bulkier plastic like this, you can sometimes weed out those smaller fish, but that's the one that kind of pulled off. Got too close, basically just gonna drop it on top of him here. Geez, that guy ate it right away. That guy ate it right away. Again, these guys are not anything crazy big. Not quite what I'd like to see yet. But you can see that one definitely needed the little bit lighter jig. Another group right over there. Cast on them. Right on the edge, but jeez, those guys came up and just smoked. There's like 4 of them that came right up. You can see right over here, more shallow water, because this lake can hold some decent sized fish. There we go. But another one, again, use that 1/16 ounce. Yeah, they're getting closer to those weeds. Up ahead a little bit. You can see some of that group is pretty close still. I'm just gonna kind of drop down, basically right underneath us here. Yep, right underneath us. Surprised they didn't spook. You can see we're right along that weed edge. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Some even coming out of the weeds. So they might honestly, might be starting that spawning process. Another group moving out. See if we can't pull another one out of here. Yep. Got right around that group. Shallow again. Woohoo! This guy is fired up. Decent fish too. You can see that group kind of swimming away. We're shallow. We got the reeds right next to us. Decent fish. Probably could be almost throwing a slip bobber here too, but I'm gonna keep using that 1/16 ounce jig. Could probably downsize smaller too, but there's a pile out there. Oh, you can see they spooked from that a little bit. See if I can get one. That one looks fired up. Come on. Thought he was going to come up and smoke it. There one came a bit a little better. They're staying put a little better. I'm going to pull this guy in quick so he doesn't get too spooked. Doesn't spook the school too bad. You see that little tungsten jig right there on that little grub. All right, well, got to catch a few before it got dark. Some of them moved even closer to the surface, so I was really utilizing that 16th. Probably could have went even lighter, but again, that little bit buoyant plastic helps as well. Fun chasing these around. There's some big schools earlier, as is typical in the evening. This is more so a winter thing, but sometimes I see it in the springtime too. They'll spread out, disperse a little bit as they go through the evening, but yeah. Hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully you're able to just get a few of these. I know I didn't show many of them. I could have thrown a slip bobber on some of those groups too. Honestly, you could catch them in a lot of different ways, but just trying to be the most efficient as I can. And that's what I ended up with, was that 16th ounce and then a little bit of the 8th ounce as well, as I was chasing some of those a little bit farther away fish or deeper fish. So as always, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.